Alright, next let's go over to the Adobe Bridge and look at some of the other images that we can use for this project. What we can do first is let's bring in this bridge that I have right here. Now keep in mind that I've already cropped these images for you, so you don't have to. I've totally saved you that step. I'm just going to show you how to combine them all together to create the montage dream scene. So I'm just going to double click on this tower to bring it into Photoshop. And if you would like to get better at cropping, please check out the cropping and masking tutorial that you'll find on this course. But you'll see here that I've completely removed the background. You can see this is what it was originally. Look at that. And I just totally removed that. So since I've already done this, all I have to do is select the Move tool, click on this bridge here, and just drag that over to the montage image, just like this. What I want to do now is make this a smart object. Now, if you're using Photoshop 7 or Photoshop CS, you might not be able to make a smart object, and that's okay. So you can go ahead and just skip this part. But I'm going to come up here to Layer, over here to Smart Objects, and group this into a smart object. That way that this layer right here is non-destructible. So let me go ahead and just name this. We'll make this up as maybe like an oil tower. And it'll be hard to tell what it is once we get it out there and blur it and everything like that. But what I'm going to do over here, Edit, and down here to Free Transform. And what I'll do is turn on this button right here, which is the Maintain Aspect Ratio button. And I'll adjust the width size down to about 25%. And that'll resize it down enough so I can select the transformation handles. I'll hold down Alt, which is Option on the Mac, and also Shift. And I'll click on one of the corners and grab those handles and just resize this down. And I can position this off in the distance. And that's how we want it to look anyway. But if I move this over here, somewhere about right here, and you don't have to be perfect because since these are smart objects, the layers are non-destructible. So therefore we can go back and resize the images if we need to without losing any quality of this layer. So I like this. I'm going to go ahead and just press the Enter key on the keyboard to confirm that transformation. And I can just bring this down. Let me try that one more time. Select the Move tool here. And I'll bring this down right about here. There we go. And I'm going to make another copy of this oil tower layer. And I'll just call this oil tower far. Because I'm going to create another oil tower, but this one's going to be out in the distance. So it's going to be smaller. Something like this. There we go. And I'm just going to put it out in the distance, just like this. And here's a trick that you can do is to make these look like they're farther away. What you can do when you're creating any type of sequence or whatever it is, you can blur the images, and that will bring more focus with the foreground object. And it'll also make it look like they're set back a little bit farther. Now, we can't blur a smart object layer, so what we have to do is come over to the layer thumbnail down here at the very bottom right corner, and you'll hover over that and it'll say Smart Object Thumbnail. Well, if I double click on that, it will load the image up in its own separate window here. And then so we can blur the image, or we can blur the tower here inside this image instead. Photoshop creates a temporary PSB file that allows us to edit this layer in its own separate document, which is kind of nice. But what we can also do is make a duplicate layer inside this PSB file. So I can drag this smart object image here and make a duplicate of it. Even if we make changes to this PSB file, we can always go back and revert back to the original as well. So there's lots of things you can do here. If I come up here and go to File, Save, and if I close this, Photoshop will update the image. Then check this out. I can come right over to the Smart Object layer, double click on that icon right here, And it opens up this PSB file, and I still have both those two layers. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because we're going to apply a blur to this tower, but I don't want to affect the original. I don't want to totally destroy the original, because once we blur things, it's really hard to get back the original detail in the image. Almost impossible. So I like to make a copy. And so what I'll do is come up here to Filter, Blur, and over here to Gaussian Blur, and we'll blur this out just a little bit, just like this. There we go, that looks good. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then what I can do, after this is done applying, I'll come up here to File, Save, and then as soon as I move back over to this image, Photoshop will update our montage scene image right here. Look at that. Now it's hard to tell that anything has really happened, but if I select the Zoom tool and zoom in, we can see that this layer is slightly blurred. And if I come over to the history palette, we can see this is before, and now this is after. Just removing some of that little bit of detail there. Now let's go back over to the layers palette, and I'll double click on this oil tower far. And for this one, I'll come up here to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And now this one's just a little bit more farther off in the distance. So what I'll do is increase the blur of this image here. There we go. And then I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I'll come up here to File, Save. And then I'll click back over on the image. Photoshop will update our montage image here. And there we go. And we can go ahead and just zoom into it real closely here. And we can see clearly that this is before. And this is after. So there you go. Those little fine details make a big difference. And we could probably blur those out a little bit more, but we can always go back to that later on. Now, to make these two towers here, make them look like they're really in the water, but because you can see right here that it's just the edge is very defined right here on the bottom of these towers. One thing that we can do with these smart objects is create layer masks on these layers. So we don't always have to open them up and edit them in their own separate files. We can actually just select the layer and come down to the bottom of the layers palette and click on this Add Layer Mask button. And that'll create a layer mask right next to this smart object. So what I can do with that is actually erase away parts of the image without actually affecting the image itself. So I can just click on the oil tower layer mask and make myself a brush here that's a little bit soft. And then I'll make sure that the foreground color is black, because in order for this layer mask to work, we must paint black on the white mask. Now, if the mask is black, then we must paint white. It's just the other way around. So what I can do is just come down and paint along the bottom of this right here. And what I think I'll do is make sure that this opacity is at 100%, and that'll help us out a little bit. Probably set at 20% from the last project that we did on the DVD, but I'll just come in through here and do this. Now you see how that's very gradual? Now you see how that can kind of look like it's in the water a little bit more? Because it just looked too perfect before. And then what I can do is hold down the Shift key, hold down the space bar to get the hand tool. And then I'll just drag over to this image over here, and I'll zoom into it just a little bit closer. And then let's select Oil Tower Far, which is the top layer here. And I'll add a layer mask on this layer as well. And I'll select the brush tool with all the same settings, or I could probably make that brush a little bit smaller, being that this tower here is much smaller than the other one. I'll just right along the very bottom, making that blend in with the water. You see that? Look at that. I don't want to take off too much. That looks pretty good right there. Or I can maybe just make this brush just a little bit larger and fade that a little bit more on the bottom. Look at that. Okay, so let's go ahead and zoom out and take a look. Look at that. Okay. And any time we can go back and remove more if we want to. That's the great thing about smart objects, is that if you find that you want to go back and remove a little bit more, like you say you just weren't satisfied the first time you did it, well, you can just go back and make a change. And that's what's great about using a layer mask, is that if we make a mistake, all we have to do is change the foreground to white and then come back through here and fill it back in. Look at this. So when I work on projects, I just like to make it so in case I do make a mistake, I can always go back and fix it. And that's just how most people should think and how most people should work in Photoshop. Let's go ahead and start adding more things to the montage dream scene. Let's go back into the Adobe Bridge and let's see, what can we do next? How about these two towers right here? I'll just go ahead and double click and bring these into Photoshop, and then I'll select the Move tool and drag these over. And let's go ahead and make this a smart object. So up here on Layer, Smart Object, Group into Smart Object, and then I'll come up here to Edit, Free Transform. I'll hold down Alt and Shift, which is Option and Shift on the Mac, and I'll resize these down. Let's position this, could be somewhere over here, and I can probably pull these towers down so they look like they're closer. You see, because if they're back on the water too much, then it's going to make them look like they're farther away. But if I bring them a little bit closer like this, or just drag it down, it'll make it seem like it's closer. That looks good. I'll go ahead and press the Enter key on the keyboard to confirm that. And then let's go ahead and double click on this background copy, which I will now rename to Two Towers. And then I will double click on the Smart Object thumbnail. Up here on Filter, well, first, before I do that, let's make a duplicate layer. There we go. Up here on Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll blur these out too because these are a little distant and we don't want too much detail. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then what I'll do is over here on File, select Save, and then I'll close this out. We're going to need to mask the bottom of these two towers as well. So I'll make a layer mask by clicking right here on the Two Towers layer, right here, and I'll select the paintbrush, and I can press D and X on the keyboard to get the black as the foreground, and then I'll just bring this brush over and get rid of these trees here. Some of these things you might not be able to see from far away, and that's okay. And then I can select the Move tool and bring, whoops, let me go ahead and click on the Smart Object there. Let me try that one more time. Bring this down. And there's one thing though, I think it might be a bug, but there's no link. You can't link the mask and the Smart Object together. So if you move the Smart Object anywhere, then you're going to have to click on the mask and then move the mask down. You see that? So you almost have to do both. Why it's like that, I don't know. And I haven't taken a look at the CS3 version yet to really see if that's still there or not. But there we go. Take a look at that. Now let's zoom out and see how that looks. Okay, that's pretty awesome. It looks like this building here, I could probably move this over just a touch. And then of course I'll have to move the mask over. There we go. Just to make these two more farther apart. Okay, this is looking pretty good.